Imran, thank you so much for the kind introduction and for all your effort in putting together this webinar, this session, which is critically, it comes at a critically important time in India's journey, I guess. And to Muzamel, I really thoroughly enjoyed your important lesson on Kashmir. You speak so beautifully and forthrightly on the topic, and also to our friend. Thank you for your comments and your bravery in reporting from India, what is a truly alarming situation. Now, I guess when we talk about Modi's India, when we talk about BJP ruled India, I mean, we've now come to the point where we need to speak frankly and honestly about the situation there, what the situation as it relates specifically to Muslims in India and Kashmir. And I guess the only way we can frame the current situation is like this. That is that Muslims in India and Kashmir now find themselves on the brink of genocide. Now, if it was only me saying something like that, that could be easily dismissed or waved away as the hyperbole of a loudmouth and obnoxious journalist. But when you have people like Dr. Gregory Stanton, who is arguably the world's leading expert in genocide and ethnic cleansing. Now, when he says the persecution of Muslims in India and Kashmir has reached a stage just before genocide, then the international community really needs to take notice. Now, make no mistake, this is a 5-alarm fire that we're faced with. And, I guess the unrelenting upwards trend in hate crimes and discriminatory policies against Muslims, that's the sound of that alarm bell ringing loudly. Now, how did it get to be this bad? I mean, in such a short period of time, it feels like that. But I mean, even though Muslims have been a marginalized minority in India for a long time, under Modi and under BJP, they've not only become marginalized, they've also become identified and demonized as a security threat. And I guess that's what's interesting in the last, half a dozen years is the way that security threat narrative has morphed and evolved since Modi came to power. Previously, it was kind of like, Pakistan and Pakistani militants coming across the border were identified and perceived as the threat to India's security in mainstream political discourse and the body politic. But now it is, today it's become Indian Muslims themselves are portrayed as an internal domestic threat. So we've seen how that's shifted. We've seen Muslims framed as an external security threat coming in from Pakistan, whereas in more recent times we've seen them portrayed as a domestic threat from within. And we now have BJP politicians. I mean, they don't hide their animus, and they don't hide their or conceal their ultimate objective here. They speak quite openly about wanting to either eradicate or annihilate Muslims from India and turn into a Hindu Russia, or at least make life so unbearable for the 200 million Muslims that live in the country as citizens, that to make life so unbearable that Muslims will have no other choice or feel like they have no other choice but to self-deport either to Pakistan or Bangladesh or elsewhere. And that's why, and I heard our friend refer to, Radio Rwanda. I mean, it's such a perfect metaphor because we see Muslims constantly portrayed in those kind of genocidal terms over and over again as traitors, as terrorists, as pests. And this is round the clock vitriol and stigmatization and otherization and demonization. And the media, we not only have the mainstream media. I mean, when people who aren't familiar with India's media landscape ask me to describe it, and I always give the comparison with Fox News in the United States, where we see, just the toxic effect that Fox News has had on American society, to the point where 40% of the country don't even live or inhabit a world where, rather inhabit a world where facts are meaningless, that alternative facts are everything. And well, if you want to know what India is like, imagine, 3 dozen equivalents of Fox News blaring non-stop hatred about Muslims and other non-Hindu religious minorities. And so we're seeing, this internal, Muslims now become this internal domestic security threat. And that narrative has gained, extra traction in the time of COVID-19 with the arrival of the pandemic. And we've seen, hashtags like Corona Jihad go viral and become top trending topics in on Twitter and in Facebook. First, Muslims were accused of bringing the virus into the country. Then we had fake news stories. I mean, dozens and dozens of fake news stories going viral, receiving, tens of thousands of likes and reshares, false, bogus videos accusing Muslims of deliberately spreading coronavirus in the markets, deliberately spreading the virus on utensils in restaurants and bring it to markets and so forth. And so this has had an effect of totally radicalizing the full breadth and width of Indian society. And, we talk about, especially in the Western media, we hear, radicalization in Islam has almost become synonymous. They're used so interchangeably in Western media discourse. But we're seeing radicalization of 700 million Hindus in India. And because of this round the clock vitriol, which is spewing across not only mainstream news programs, but also social media platforms. Now, when we talk about radicalization in the context of violent extremism, what we talk about is we examine how, groups and individuals are radicalized through in-group versus out-group constructed narratives, with the in-group perceiving or imagining the out-group to be an existential threat. Now, this is where we find a giant share of India's Hindu majority today, them identifying Muslims to be an existential threat to not only Hindus, but also India itself and India's democratic institutions. Now, it's upon this narrative, this internal threat narrative, that BJP is basically Nazified, or is in a process of Nazification of all levels and all levers of Indian political and social life. We now have today, I think, last count, five BJP ruled states are now considering implementing anti-love jihad laws. This is wanting to outlaw Hindu women from marrying Muslim men, them believing that it's a conspiracy by Muslim men to convert Hindu women and then transform India into an Islamic caliphate. I mean, this is, they didn't just invent these kind of proposed laws. They, as the previous speakers have rightfully noted, these laws and policies and ideas flow straight from the European fascist political parties and Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. And with the Nuremberg laws we had in Germany in the 1930s, Jews were banned from marrying those with, quote, German blood. Now, this love jihad conspiracy goes hand in hand with a myriad number of other conspiracies that locate Muslims at the center of this great plot to subvert Hindu majority India and democracy. I mean, we have land jihad, economic jihad, jobs jihad, history jihad, secularism jihad. I mean, it's crazy. And it makes you think. There's 200 million Muslims in India, and you have all of these conspiracies. I mean, 200 million Muslims working so hard on these conspiracies to transform India into an Islamic caliphate. It makes you wonder that these Muslims aren't busy doing anything, or the conspiracies are totally bogus, which of course they are. Now, this radicalization of mainstream Indian society has also created the space for the Modi government to enact a recent pair of anti-Muslim laws, basically anti-Muslim apartheid laws, otherwise known as the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens. Now, both these laws otherize Muslims and then identify those who occupy, really the most vulnerable rungs of Indian society for deportation. Now, we're seeing, the construction of, concentration camps in Assam. These are being built to fulfill the objectives of these anti-Muslim citizenship laws. These are being set up for Muslim migrants who've lived in this part of India for decades. The families have been there for generations, living there as bona fide Indian citizens. And now these are people who have paid their taxes, who have voted in elections, who have obeyed the law, are good, honorable, Indian-loving citizens, but because they live in poverty, they don't have the documentation that obviously middle-class Indians are privileged to, and therefore they're being identified for removal, and thus the setting up the construction of these concentration camps to hold upwards of 2 million Muslims in these regions. In that extent, it's no different to what Beijing is trying to do in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs. This is, by any other name, it's ethnic cleansing. It's about trying to change the demography of India to one that through forced eradication, through deportation, and through outward hostility, and as the point I made earlier, that to make life as unbearable as possible for Muslims until they voluntarily remove themselves from the country. Now, these atmospherics have obviously provided the fuel for the anti-Muslim pogrom that the world witnessed at the end of February earlier this year, when more than 50 Muslims were beaten, hacked, and burnt to death by BJP radicalized mobs. One of the most terrifying aspects of the New Delhi riots or the anti-Muslim pogrom there is chilling, and to see police officers, Delhi police, participating in the violence, egging Hindu mobs on, and then if they weren't participating in the violence or egging these mobs on to carry out the violence, then they were busy framing the victims as the perpetrators. And we've seen today still, it's be close to 12 months since these murders happened. And the Delhi police continue to drag their heels in obstructing a justice for the families and the survivors of these attacks. And I see this time and time again. Early this year, I started putting together a Muslim hate crime database, and I've started at 2018. I'll work back all the way until Modi was sworn into office. But my goal is to document every single anti-Muslim hate crime which has occurred in India during Modi's reign. And what you see in case after case, time after time, is you see a Muslim victim of a target of a hate crime, usually by a Hindutva radicalized mob. You see the victim or the victim's family report the crime to the police, and the police put either side with the perpetrators or put enough intimidation and pressure on the families, leveling charges against the perpetrator. They eventually drop the case and drop the charge altogether. The entire criminal justice system we're seeing now has been swung against Muslims in the country, from the Supreme Court all the way down to local courts and even to local police jurisdictions. This is no different to way Serb nationalists in the early 90s tried to make life as difficult as they could for Serbian Muslims. And it's certainly the same thing as the Nazis did to the Jews in Germany and the rest of Europe in the 1930s and the 1940s. The BJP is also trying to silence anybody who speaks out about these crimes, these injustices. And we're seeing a war on journalists at the moment, a war on critics against the government. Journalists are being harassed and beaten. Journalists are being imprisoned and detained indefinitely without charges. I mean, we've now reached a stage that's so bad that Amnesty International, you know, one of the world's largest human rights organizations, you know, an organization operates in battle zones around the world, closing its offices and closing its operations, rather, in India due to the pressure it's been receiving from, you know, the BJP, RSS, and other Hindutva organizations. I mean, you know, one really has to think about what kind of pressure they were under for them to forcibly, or to voluntarily rather, leave the country. So this is the India that we're grasped with today, and you know, this radicalization of the, you know, the large segment of the Hindu majority country, you know, had a knock-on effect, is, you know, with Kashmir. I mean, what Modi has done in Kashmir is stripping Kashmir of its semi-autonomous status. This is all part, you know, Modi has created the political environment, created the atmospherics that India would go along with this. Well, large sections of the population would go along with that, and this is part of completing that project to turn, you know, India and occupied territories like Kashmir onto one big Hindu Rashtra, where there's no space for Muslims to survive and thrive. Yep. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you guys.